Hey everybody, thank you so much for coming to the last talk of Hackfort. Is everybody having a fun tree fort? I am. I certainly am. And the rain, of course, this morning. I don't think you can have a tree fort without a little bit of weather. If you were at last year's tree fort, like our whole team was very happy to be in Boise Center when it was like a fridge outside. And that was the coldest tree fort. There's never been, like, I was like, the bar's been set. Like, I don't think it can get colder. Like, it's possible. But anyways, guys, thank you so much for coming out. I really appreciate it. Mike put so much work into this year's programming, and, you know, we were really blessed to be introduced to Matt Klein by our friend John Michael. And, you know, we're really stoked to have you out, Matt, by the way, and we're really happy for you to be the one closing us out. I don't want to overdo it for you, but you know, again, thank you guys for coming out. You know, it means the world. It's just this whole event is about you guys. It's about the community. It's about creating connections, you know, and I'm just so humbled to get to do this with my friends. And yeah, you know, after the show, there's these guys. After this too, we do have like our closeout music session at the stage. I'm planning to grab a couple drinks and hang out and celebrate a great year. And feel free to come say hi to us. And thanks again. I'm going to turn it over to Matt.
Awesome. Hey there. How are we doing? I love to hear it. I think yeah. Let's do it.
Do you have his slides up? It's a lock screen. Oh, that's fine.
That should do it. How about that? There we go. Lovely. Hey there. Let's do this. So this talk is called Audience Capture, How to Maintain Creative Integrity When Audiences Control Us. If you were here for that talk, good news. That's what we're going to talk about. Firstly, thank you so much for being here. Really, it means a lot. It really does. There's arguably way too many things going on right now. So the fact that you're here really means a lot. I didn't even want to be here. There were so many other things that I wanted to see. So thank you. Typically people say the thank you for the end. I want to start with it. I also acknowledge the irony in sucking up to my audience right before I talk about how audiences are dangerous and a risk to our creative integrity and sanity. I want to get that out of the way. We'll dive in. Just by a show of hands, who here would consider themselves a creator, musician, writer, shit poster online? Okay, fantastic. You're in the right room. As for an introduction, who I am and why I'm talking about creators and why audiences are so dangerous, my name is Matt Klein. I'm a digital anthropologist, a cultural theorist, a researcher, a writer. I think these are just really sexy ways of saying I find patterns in culture. That's really all I do. I help organizations, whether that be big brands, investors, the press, just make sense of social change. And by making sense of social change, they could strategize for what happens tomorrow. I'm also the head of global foresight at Reddit, although I'm not here representing Reddit. I share that just to say my background is in online dynamics and the weird things that happen online when how we create, express, and communicate online. I'm also a creator. My medium of choice is writing. I've been writing for a handful of years. Writing to me is my way of trying to make sense of the world, trying to put words to things that I'm feeling. And there's been one topic that I just can't get out of my head. It's endlessly fascinating, and to me, no one is talking enough about. And that's this idea of audience capture. Again, just by a quick show of hands, who's heard the phrase audience capture before today? Okay, a few. That's a line for those who didn't raise their hand. What are we actually talking about here? What is audience capture? I think the best place to start is analyzing our own language, which is when we talk about creators and work, we use phrases like, did the film make you feel a certain way? Did the song make you sad? Did the speech change your thinking, right? The work does something to an audience. Or further, the creator, the maker, the artist is in a power position. They're doing something to an audience. The artist is attempting to capture the audience. What I'm interested in is the inverse of that dynamic, what an audience does to a creator. And from my vantage point, what I'm finding as I look out into culture, and more specifically, the ways in which technologies are changing our expression, Creators are no longer making for themselves, they're making for algorithms. They're making for the mob, they're making for a number just to make the number go up, and we don't even know why. That is audience capture. And I believe we're at risk of a few things. Firstly, we're losing our integrity. We're no longer making what we want to make. We're trying to serve other people. And as a result of that, we're losing a few things. Losing our intent, our integrity, and most importantly, our identity. We're now just making content for the sole sake of making content. We're losing ourselves in that process. And with that, we're losing our sanity. Right? Making is not fun, when it should be fun. We're trying to appease to the mass number of people online. We're trying to make everyone happy. That is physically and emotionally impossible. So how do we regain that creative process where it is for us and it is fun? That's the goal today. So a question then becomes, well, what is audience capture? How do I know it when I see it? What's an example? So a story that often gets shared about audience capture is that of a vlogging vegan violinist. And this is a true story. And this creator was on YouTube, and they just couldn't find their traction online. They just couldn't find any viewers, any subscribers, nothing. So they decided they were going to start making mukbang videos. For those not familiar with mukbang, essentially it's when you eat in front of the camera. It's a trend that comes out of the East when people often eat alone, there's isolation. You throw on one of these videos, and now you get to eat with other people. Typically it's live streamed. So this YouTuber starts making mukbang videos. And sure enough, because it's an existing content trend, more and more and more people start showing up. And over time, the audience starts interacting with that creator. They say, eat some of this. See if you could eat more of that. And they comply. Fast forward some years later, this YouTuber has amassed millions and millions and millions of subscribers, billions of views across all of their channels. But as a result, they're now sick. They're sick from the amount that they have eaten at an unhealthy rate. The audience has consumed the creator. This is your face likely of like, what? What are you talking about? This will never happen to me. And I agree, it will likely never happen to you, which is why I hate sharing that story or why people share that story as the encapsulation of audience capture. It's dark, it's extreme, it's unlikely, therefore how am I ever going to relate to it? And I agree. I think a better question is, who here, or rather who hasn't, and you don't have to raise your hands for this one, has ever posted something online, a song, a post, anything, and you're looking at it, and you're looking at it, and you look at it and you just delete it. You delete it before anyone even shows up. That, to me, is an example of audience capture. And the audience isn't even there. You're just imagining that audience, right? We're putting a piece of ourselves out there, and we're fearful of what people may say before they've even said the thing. This, to me, is death by a million paper cuts online. And it happens every day, all the time, and it's unspoken and ubiquitous. Another example is how musicians today are speeding up the tempo of their songs so it could fit within a TikTok length, or how some artists are retitling their songs as the same name of another popular song on the off chance that the algorithm may pick it up, or someone searching for the popular song may accidentally click their song and that's how they get discovered. We're not even titling the things that we want. Another example is outrage or attention bait. This is content for the sole purpose of just trying to attract eyeballs. My favorite example, or rather least favorite example, this happened a couple of weeks ago. I don't know if anyone saw this. The guy who made shrimp in an airplane bathroom sink. Okay, lucky you if you missed that one. The guy films himself making shrimp in the water in an airplane bathroom and then films himself eating it. The guy knows what he's doing. This is content for the sole sake of just trying to get more people to watch. Another one that haunts me, a little more mild, is this woman, she puts an onion on the ceramic plate and takes this giant like butcher knife and it's like hacking away at this onion, like barely missing her fingers. She takes all this poorly diced onion and she's like scratching the plate and then puts it in a cup of water and just starts drinking the onion water, calling it a health hack. She knows what she's doing. This is content just to piss people off. We're not making what we want, we're making just for the eyeballs. What we used to do is make content that we liked, and then an audience showed up, and that's how we got people. Now we're just reverse engineering just for the sake of eyeballs. Another example is polling the crowd. I think this is a little bit more mild. Some of us may even done this ourselves. We ask our audience, hey y'all, What do you want me to post more of? What do you want to see from me? I think it's mild, but why are we asking them? We should just do it ourselves. We have that answer. Another example is A/B testing thumbnails. This is its entire industry, right? We're spending more time trying to optimize what thumbnail should go on our video than what we're spending on the video itself. Another example, without getting too political, we could argue our news has been captured by its audience. Our news is no longer interested in news as much as they're interested in entertainment to affirm the existing beliefs of an audience. It happens at our institutions as well. Another example that happens at our institutions, I'm calling this audience as editor. Anyone know the story with Sonic the Hedgehog in the trailer? Okay, some nods. For those not familiar with this one, again, lucky you that you seem to have missed this. The studio puts out the trailer for Sonic the Hedgehog a few years ago, and people freak the fuck out. They hate the way that Sonic looks. Just for those who missed it, that's what Sonic looked like originally in that trailer. People took their pitchforks, they lit it on fire, and they demanded the studio to reanimate that entire film. And the studio did. The studio reanimated the entire Sonic the Hedgehog movie. The reason I want to share this example, again, audience capture happens at our institutions, not just to individuals, but further, audiences sometimes have good points to make, right? It's not all or nothing. An audience may help us with their own work or further help us get to better looking hedgehogs. The last story I'm going to use about audience capture is a personal one. As I mentioned, I'm a writer. I started writing on Medium, which I think is still around, and I was getting about 2 views on average, if I was lucky, my mom and my dad, but I just kept at it. I just kept going. Again, writing was my way of trying to make sense of culture. Kept going and going. Sure enough, that landed me a contract job at Forbes, which was to make sense of the weird things that were happening online during the pandemic. And what I quickly learned for writing like a publication, like Forbes, is that the only way to amass views is through search traffic. That's the only way people find your stories. So the only way someone could read your work is if you're writing something that is already being searched for in the first place. So you're incentivized to write for SEO, or what people are already searching for, or the stories that already exist. I didn't have to be doing this. I had a full-time job, and I found myself writing things that I didn't want to write about. I said, I don't like this. I'm opting out. So I decided to create a Substack publication, and I called it ZINE. And for me, ZINE was just my way of kind of starting from scratch. And I made a proclamation. I said, if I'm going to do this, I don't even care if just 20 people show up. Because those are at least 20 people who are raising their hand to say, I want to hear what Matt has to say. They don't even have to open the email, but rest assured, at least they're receiving it. And doing this was my way of reclaiming a strategy to write about what I wanted to write about. And funny enough, that's perhaps the most effective way for unintentionally building an audience. Over the last just few years, ZINE has ballooned to tens of thousands of readers around the world. And last year, I just won the Webby Award for Best Independent Publication on the Internet. And I don't say this to brag. There's a little brag in there, I guess. A little brag. But I say this to say, as these thousands and thousands and thousands of email addresses started pouring in, I was looking up, who are these people? Where are they coming from? These were executives at massive companies. These were government officials. These were authors whose books I was buying. And that pressure began to mount and mount and mount. My editing process became debilitating. I began self-censoring a little bit. And little did I know, audience capture seeped back into my writing process. So I decided I needed to take a pause. I needed to kind of reset. But this time I went meta, and at least temporarily. I decided I was going to create a zine, a printed piece of work about audience capture itself. And this would be my way of holding my work. Just being able to touch it and feel it. This was for me. This wasn't for anyone else. It's so easy just to publish something online. I wanted to slow down that process. It just took months. I was figuring out paper stock and international shipping logistics, which I totally regret. But again, it was just for me, just to slow down. And again, it turns out when you do something for yourself, unintentionally, that's the best way of connecting with an audience. I sold hundreds of zines around the world. I had more intimate conversations with people through the zine than I had in my entire existence on social media. and it's landed me some pretty incredible opportunities, this one notwithstanding. What I learned by writing this zine and researching audience capture is the best way to overcome this is simply to shine a light. That's literally all it takes. Just remaining mindful of its presence is the one way that it just begins to disintegrate and fall apart. So what I want to do today for the rest of our time is do exactly that. Shine the light on audience capture. Understand where is it coming from? What theory or academia underpins this thing? Why does it feel so intense today? And further, what are some tips, tricks, and strategies we can employ ourselves to remain mindful of how dangerous audience capture is? So that's what we'll do. I came up with 4 theories. I didn't come up with them. I came across 4 theories that I believe are underpinning this entire thing. And again, I think by understanding where this is coming from, we could hold on to it. It doesn't feel as if it's just in our heads. So the first one is Charles Cooley's looking glass theory. We're going to date this around 1902. And what Cooley proposes is that we do not create identity by ourselves. We don't do it in isolation or privately. Rather, we create a sense of self through the eyes of others. So to put it another way, I'm not me unless I'm examining who I am through your eyes. We could put it even more specific or online. Have you ever gone to your own LinkedIn profile, your own Instagram profile, and looked at yourself as if someone else was looking at it? That's the looking glass theory. But consciously and subconsciously, we're constantly examining ourselves through the eyes of others and then reposturing accordingly. And why this feels so intense today is that there are so many pieces of us out online. There are so many profiles of us. We're constantly examining who we are through the eyes of the world, and it is absolutely exhausting. The second theory is Erving Goffman's self-presentation. What sociologist Erving Goffman proposes is that we are each actors on a stage. We're performing. But we're not deceiving an audience by any means. We're just performing for them. We're mindful of our social environment, who's around us, and we behave accordingly. I am, I guess, somewhat figuratively on a stage right now, but based upon my environment, I'm mindful of who's here, and it's informing how I'm speaking, what I'm wearing, how I'm acting. Who I am in this moment is very different than who I am going to be tonight. Yet I'm still the same person. So when we apply this online, we have to recognize again how many profiles of us there are. We're constantly performing. And Goffman calls this impression management. We're constantly tweaking and mindful of who's around us. And that pressure is exhausting. And further, what Goffman proposes is that there's this thing as the onstage and the backstage. So at night, you're getting ready for bed, you're taking a shower, you're getting into bed, you're backstage. No one's there. You're letting your guard down. Online, there is no backstage. And as a result, our performances are immortal. Every piece of us that we put online is there forever. That performance is going and going and going. So right before we post, not only are we engaging in impression management, but we're engaging in it in such a way where we're thinking about eternity, which is exhausting. Number 3, Bentham and Foucault's Digital Panopticon, a little bit of philosophy 101. We'll date this around 1975. Imagine a guard tower in a prison. The tower can look into the cells of the prisoners, and the prisoners can see the guard tower. But the prisoners cannot see whether or not someone is in that tower. So what you get is this imagined state of surveillance. You always have to be on your best behavior. Foucault applies this to society as a whole. We're constantly being conditioned. We could take this a step further and apply it online. There's no such thing as imagined surveillance. It's very real surveillance. We know people are there. So as a result, the state of endless performances is totally exhausting, right? It all begins to compound. And lastly, a little bit of psychology 101, Pavlov and classical conditioning. It's 1890s. We got Air Bud crushing it. In this experiment, Pavlov has a dog. Pavlov brings food to the dog, and the dog begins to salivate. Pavlov brings the food to the dog, and this time rings a bell. And the dog begins to salivate. And he repeats it. Brings the food, rings the bell, dog salivates. Brings the food, rings the bell, dog salivates. Brings the food, rings the bell, dog salivates. This time, Pavlov withholds the food and just rings the bell. And the dog still salivates. The dog has become conditioned. It's created an association between the stimuli and the food. Another psychologist, B.F. Skinner, takes us a step farther. With rats and rewards and punishments, we can manipulate behavior just through stimuli. We relate this online today. Every single tap, whether that be a subscription, a stream, a like, those are stimuli. They're governing our behavior. If we think about some of our favorite social platforms, it is no coincidence that the icon for notification is a bell. So what? Or the yeah and. Where do we go from here? There's two things for me that are super important, at least as I was reviewing this literature. The first is, it's not that audiences are so dangerous. They're not malicious, but rather we're so open. We're vulnerable. We need other people. We need them for our identity. We need affirmation. We need belonging. We need community. And second, this is not new. We've been talking about this for decades, if not 100+ years. And I think this affirms a lot of what we're experiencing. This is just a part of the human condition. But this kind of goes against what I started with, which is audience capture feels so intense today, or it feels very different. And I think what's happening is that we are in new environments. We're in new social environments that feels as if it's dialing this theory up to 11. It's exaggerating, it's amplifying what is happening here. So what I want to do is unpack some of those environmental changes as to why it feels so intense today. And again, I hope that affirms a lot of what we're experiencing. So I'll unpack 3 environmental changes. The first we'll go deeper into, and the other 2 we'll hit lightly. The first is an obvious one, our life online. In the scheme of all of human existence, living online in our little profiles and pieces of content, relatively really, really new. We're still trying to crack it and figure it out. 31% of US adults now report that they're online almost constantly. This is up from 21% in 2015, for better or worse. It's our new context. We now sit at a global lunchroom table. The world is watching us. I think historically, we had little small tables. We had our close connections, we had Dunbar's number, we were making for a small little circle. Today, our lunch table is the world, and we're trying to make for everyone, and we're trying to make everyone happy. We just can't do it. Second, it's a bit cliche at this point, but we have this idea of endless, just incessant social comparison. We are comparing everyone's highlight reels with our everyday life. That gap is way too much. And further, when we think about the creator economy, we look at people like, I don't know, Mr. Beast. Just because Mr. Beast uses the same platforms or iPhones that we do, it doesn't make his success any more attainable. He is no different than the 0.001% of any other celebrities that had come before us. And further, I don't think we even want what he has at the end of the day. Number 3, everything is quantified. I think this is a talk in itself, but when we've built the internet upon zeros and ones, somehow those numbers seep out everywhere. Everything has a number. And when everything has a number, we have this, I don't know what it is, this reflex to just make number go big. We just do it all the time. I think my take, at least, is this idea of just accumulation. We're just conditioned just to gather more. But when we have numbers and we want to make it go big, we start optimizing. Optimizing, not realizing why we're optimizing in the first place. And for me, optimization is inherently anti-human. It's rejecting the way things naturally are. We also exist in hyperspeed. Everything is so fast. Never before have we been more connected. Never before has information traveled so quickly. This is at tension with the creative process. The creative process is not meant to go that fast. The creative process needs time, it needs tension, it needs writer's block, and we're trying to make that as fast as our memes and headlines. They're incompatible. We also have radical democratization. I think this is a great thing, just full stop. Never before have more people been creating, access to tools and softwares and connections, incredible. AI, love it. The caveat here is that as more people are creating, they're putting more of themselves out there. In a moment of hyper creation, It's a moment of hyper-vulnerability. My mom has thousands of Instagram followers. I don't know how or why, but as more people are creating, that then comes with those pressures of a public image. We've cracked creating content. We've cracked building an audience. We have not cracked how to deal with those pressures. And lastly, for this section, like as a post. This one is so rarely discussed, and I find it endlessly fascinating, which is, let's pick LinkedIn, for example. If I like something on LinkedIn, it will then show up in someone else's feed as Matt Klein liked, and then here's that post. The atom of engagement online, just a little thumbs up, now comes with the same consequences or real estate as if I was posting myself. So now going back to Goffman and impression management, just deciding whether or not to support another person now conjures these ideas of impression management and do I want to be seen liking this thing as if I was just posting my own piece of content. And that's the smallest little thing. The smallest action now comes with the same consequences of posting or performing ourselves. The second environmental shift on Unpack is the financial one. The number of working class actors, musicians, and writers has shrunk by half since the 1970s. And I don't think this is because we're any less creative. I think what's changed is our financial environment. The starving artist has died. It is so hard to be an artist and find full-time income from that. And as a result, you have to subsidize that with part-time or full-time employment. So you're doing the labor of part-time or full-time employment. You're doing the labor of the creative act. And because of radical democratization and so many people are creating, you're now doing the labor of trying to cut through and market yourself as well. And that's how we get A/B testing the thumbnails. So as we're doing all of this labor, we feel compelled as if, well, there better be a financial upside for all of this work. And further, when we're doing all this work now just for $1, that dollar now informs the creative process, and we get into a mess. And that's not to say that we shouldn't be making money from our work. We absolutely should. That's incredible. But it's a lot harder to do so. And the third shift is that of isolation. We are in a loneliness epidemic and a friend recession. In the 90s, only 16% of Americans had less than 2 friends. Today, 33% have less than 2 friends. And 20% of single men now say they don't have any close friends whatsoever. So now, when an audience does show up, it feels really good. It feels really good. We'll rather take a comment from anyone because we're not getting that satisfaction, that fulfillment, that interaction like we have historically. Further, if outside validation is your only source of nourishment, you'll be hungry for the rest of your life. We are trying to find that fulfillment from other people, forgetting that it has to come from within. That's the only way that it's going to happen. So we take these environmental shifts and we begin to see how those theories begin to get dialed up. And I had a question, and I was wondering whether or not there's been ever a published academic paper on audience capture. And as of last year, the answer was no, but the first paper just came out about this entire thing. And the study looked at 30,000 users across about 19 million posts from 2015 to 2021. And their hypothesis was, do popularity shocks change behavior? And what they meant by a popularity shock was, does a piece of content that receives a above average amount of engagements, comments, views, beyond what the user's baseline was, does that change their behavior? So if they're surprised or shocked by that popularity, does anything happen? What do you think? They found a few things. I'll hit, I think, the 2 most important. The first was, people increase post frequency after a popularity shock. So if they experience an outsized amount of engagement, people start scrambling. They start posting more frequently than what they traditionally have. And second, people share more similar content to what received the shock. So they're coding the language and topics of these posts as well. So when you receive a shock, not only are you posting more frequently, you're now posting more about what received the shock in the first place. We're conditioned. Plain and simple. So on one hand, and I debate Liz, so what? Again, yeah, and. Maybe this is not a bad thing. Maybe this is just people simply finding content market fit. They're finding their audience. They're finding something that works for them and their people. Who cares? But I think the tension is, what if we're making content or posting more frequently than we want? That's the difference for me. To be yourself in a world that is constantly trying to make you something else is the greatest accomplishment. This is what we're after. How do we find resonance? How do we find money? How do we find attention in a way that works for us, not just for other people or because of the people who are showing up? So with that, I've developed about 10 strategies or tips and tricks, my ways of trying to become more mindful of what's happening here. I invite you to upcycle, remix, make it your own, take the ones that work, leave behind the ones that don't, open source. Number one, remember that we're measuring faux values. In other words, false metrics. What we're measuring is not necessarily what's most important. Rather, it's the only things that we have available. What we care most about, it's really hard to measure. Passion, fandom, love, loyalty, commitment from an audience. How do you add a number to that? You can't really. So therefore, we don't optimize for it. We have access to open rates and views. Therefore, we just start optimizing for that. Further, it's a bit of a spicy take. Not only does it not matter what others think, but it's not your business to know. Just because we have access to these metrics doesn't necessarily mean that we have to be paying attention to them. And further, we don't even know what they truly think. We only know what they say, and what they say is not always what they truly think. What people say, what people feel, and what people do are very different things. But we only have access to the say part. So we think that's the most important. But further, as for the say part, we're only hearing those that are the vocal minority, those who are deciding to say something. And in that ignores and overlooks the silent, satisfied majority. So we get this skewed sense of what's most important. With that, number two, numbers deceive. Numbers lie to us all of the time. We're on this hedonistic treadmill. We finally get 1,000 streams, great. 1,001 awaits you. You finally get 10 million viewers, 10,000,001 awaits you. We use these numbers as milestones of success, forgetting that numbers are infinite. They keep going and going and going. They completely deceive us. Further, audiences are people. They're not numbers. And in this attempt to try to make the number go up, we are dehumanizing the people that we're trying to connect with. I just came across this concept, Goodhart's Law, which is when a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure. I was speaking with a friend who also has a newsletter. We're going back and forth, and I asked them, I'm like, what's most important to you? Why are you making this? He goes, I just want more subscribers. I'm like, no, really, like, what do you want? He's like, I just want more people. Like, the path of least resistance to get more people, just buy an email list online. You could buy 10,000 email addresses for a few $100, done. I'm being facetious, but he's like, well, what I really want is just more people and a bigger open rate. Just write clickbaity, spammy headlines and get people to open it. We forget that when we attach ourselves to these metrics, we start optimizing for the wrong things. We reverse engineer these behaviors for things at the end of the day we know are wrong. Number three, feedback is a binary. It's not a matter of listening or don't listening. That's a paradox, right? As soon as we're forced to make a choice, we're already losing. Feedback is a spectrum. It is a choose your own adventure. We get to pick and choose when and when we don't listen to an audience. Number four, beware the money trap. As soon as a dollar is exchanged, the dynamic changes a little bit. It changes from a creator and an audience to now a buyer and a seller. And again, that's not to say that we shouldn't find ways to find economic traction, but it's worth remembering when a dollar is exchanged, things change a little bit. When I was selling my zines, I took pre-orders. And I was sitting on a lot of money that I was really uncomfortable with. I was really uncomfortable because I now owed something to people. There's an exchange and now I'm in debt. I'm not doing the thing that someone paid for. And I felt that pressure as I was writing and trying to make this thing. I was rushing. because I was just trying to get away from that feeling. But I think there's an insight on the other side of this, which is there's freedom in the free. When people aren't paying for anything, you don't owe them anything. I could sometimes go for a month or so not publishing in my newsletter. People will reach out slowly but surely. They'll say, hey, just checking in. You haven't really written in a second. You working on anything? Just curious if anything's... Go away. I don't owe you anything. You're not paying for it. Number 5, build for niche. There's a paradox to building an audience, right? Taylor Swift doesn't get to be Taylor Swift by trying to be for everyone. It's in fact the opposite. It's starting small, it's starting specific, the weird, the fringy, finding that small traction at first and then going from there. Number 6, embrace some silence and some friction. As for the silence part, if you're putting something out into the world and there's no one really there, that may not be a bad thing. It may mean there are no competitors. It may mean you're doing something that no one else is doing. It may mean you're in uncharted territory. And uncharted territory is a great place to be. As for the friction part, if you're putting something out into the world and there's a lack of traction, or rather there's detractors, there's negative sentiment, there's haters, if you will, that may not be bad. That may mean you're pushing up against the status quo. It may mean you're making something not for everyone. When you're making something not for everyone, that's a good thing. I used to get unsubscription notifications on my newsletter. It made me physically uncomfortable because I'm imagining someone opening that email and they're like, ugh, not for me, unsubscribe. I'm just thinking it, I hated it. And over the course of audience capture, I realized, no, that's the metric I want to optimize for. When someone's reading something and they're thinking, this is not for me, good, not for you. It's for them. Because when we make something for everyone, we're making something for nobody. There's only one way to avoid criticism. Do nothing, say nothing, be nothing. Silence and criticism, it's inevitable. It's gonna happen. Number 7, with that, reflect on values. Why are we making? Why are we doing this? What is most important to us? And further, what is the audience that we want? What is that ideal engagement? This is not to say pick an audience and reverse engineer content just to serve them, but rather, what is the ideal person that is going to show up and how do they treat me? I think there's only one thing worse than having no audience. It's having an audience that doesn't respect you. There's a such thing as bad company, and I think we want to avoid that. The goal isn't to reach a lot of people, it is to reach the right people. And right is subjective, right? Right for me is different than right for you. And further, right is fluid. We constantly get to pick and choose what is right. For as long as we're mindful of what is right, I think we'll be on a good path. Number 8, this is my favorite. Content is sentient. Speaking with Tom Krell, he's a PhD graduate, he's an artist, a strategist, and we were talking about audience capture. And he brought up this idea that oil is sentient. I'm like, what are you talking about? And he says, oil is sentient. Oil has a mind of its own. Oil wants to be extracted from the ground and get put to use. I'm like, oh, okay. And then he related it to content, and it made total sense. Content is sentient. Content just wants to be made. Content has an agenda, and it says, make me, propagate me, let me spread. I just want to get made and made and made. I think an example of this, I don't know if this has happened to you, it's happened to me way too many times. I'll be having a conversation with a friend, super intellectual, it's deep, it's provocative, it's stimulating, and I get that itch. I'm just like, I wish we were recording this for a podcast. That's content being sentient. That's content saying, make me, even though we don't. So I think when we remember this, we get to then pick and choose. Am I making this because content wants to be made, or am I making this because I truly want to make this thing? Number 9, remember what Ford said. And funny, there is no proof historically whatsoever that Ford has ever given this quote. This is in relation to the car. And the quote is, when talking about the automobile, he says, if I asked people what they wanted, they would have just said a faster horse. Because they didn't know the car was possible. All they knew were just horses. So if you ask them, just give me faster horses. That's all I want. I'll be happy with that. Ford knew something that his audience did not. They didn't know what he was capable of. I think we could apply this to the arts as well. Rick Rubin has been going on a tear about this recently. The audience comes last. The audience comes last because they don't know what they truly want. They don't know what you're capable of. I'm going to continue the quote because it's a great one. He goes on, I'm not making it for them, I'm making it for me. And it turns out when you make something truly for yourself, you're doing the best thing you possibly can for that audience. Number 10, care more about others. I think this is perhaps the most paradoxical one because arguably this is why we're here in the first place. We're caring way too much about others. But I think the difference is all about the inflection. This is caring more about others. Ego is the demise of any single creator. And selflessness, caring more about others, is the only way we could overcome that. Audience capture preys upon independence, isolated thought, inner monologues, that anxiety. When we collaborate, when we speak with others, when we check in on others, those effects diffuse through other people. Not in a bad way, but they just lessen. So how do we bring other people into our experiences where it's not just us and we're interacting? As we wrap up, the last example of audience capture I want to talk about is literally about today in this whole talk. I didn't want to give this talk, or rather, I didn't want to create this talk. I made the zine, I put it out into the world. The work was done. It was out there. And further, rarely do I ever talk about myself. I don't think I've ever used the words I or me in a presentation, and I do this for a living. And further, I had an invitation to South by Southwest around this topic. And they reached out and they said, we want you to speak on audience capture. And I said, I don't know, 30 minutes. Can we do 30 minutes? And they gave me a conditional invitation. And they said, we only want you here if you make 60 minutes worth of content about audience capture. And here I am, giving a talk for 60 minutes on audience capture. Which begs the question, am I a victim of audience capture about my talk on audience capture from my zine on audience capture? And I debated this for a long time. And the answer I came to was no. I don't think so. I don't think so for perhaps the most important piece of this entire phenomenon, which is we simply require audiences. There is no art without a reaction. There is no talk without chairs and people sitting in them. This talk wouldn't exist if it wasn't for my interactions with readers of my work. We need other people. And further, this is not a matter of listening or not listening to them, right? This wasn't 30 minutes or 60 minutes, listen or don't listen. And if we go back to that language thing, right, I want to underscore them. We treat an audience as if it's a single entity, as if it's this shadow monster, it is a single number. That isn't what an audience is. Audiences are plural. It's people. It's you. It's you. It's you. That's why we're doing this. Right? We're doing this to connect with other people. It's not a matter of 60 minutes. Who cares? For as long as we're creating work that allows us to connect with other people and we're mindful of that, arguably that is the most important thing. I think lastly, audiences are invitations and not instructions. That's why we're making. And I think when we remember this, that shadow monster of an audience begins to fall apart. We're making it just for individuals. So with that, thank you so much for listening and being here. Thank you. Thank you, thank you. Thank you. Thank you again. With that, I want to connect. I want to talk. I want to talk about audience capture, your experiences with this phenomenon. This is a QR code to my newsletter. I replied to every email. I think I may regret that by the number of phones that just came out. But I want to talk. I'm here for that exact reason. So I think we have some. Do we have some time?
Oh yeah, we totally have time for questions. So I do wish that I do ask that if you have a question, I'll just pass the microphone to you so we can get it on the recording. So any questions? Don't be shy.
So with this, I wanted to get your opinion on, because I've talked with people about getting rid of some of the arbitrary things with regards to money and how we're kind of driving for, the bigger number, the better wealth. And I've talked to people about a calorie-based money, like a loaf of bread is, I'm just going to make a number up, 100 calories, and you're paid based on the energy it took to do a thing. And then also with regards to fees for things, you're basing your fee or your fine or your cost on bringing things towards an average rather than just some bigger number. And that way your price of a thing is more based on what is the average at the point that you've assigned that price, rather than some arbitrary number from a past point in time that is now no longer relevant.
That's the provocation, isn't it? That's kind of it. I don't know if I caught if it was a specific question or not, but I think where my mind goes is, this is so hard. Where my mind goes is, how can we rethink what value is in the first place? And I think that's kind of woo-woo that's out there. But I really do think that it doesn't always have to be about money, and it doesn't always have to be a metric of a subscriber. I think about local economies and barters and transactions. There are other methods of exchanging value that isn't $1 for a piece of work. You go back to medium.com and they've tried the whole micropayment thing and it doesn't really work. No one wants to create work for 10 cents. I'm not saying that isn't entirely feasible or possible. I'm interested in how can one exchange work for other services. So I'll give you one example. When I was at South by last week, one of the organizations that hosted me didn't have they were a social club, and they didn't have budget for a speaker. They just couldn't make it work. So I did it with someone else, and the negotiation that we came to was, we'll give a talk and we'll exchange value for membership to this social club. And it totally worked, and it was a win-win, and it was happy. How do we do that at scale? I don't know, and maybe that's the provocation. Maybe it isn't supposed to work at scale. Maybe it has to be small and local. To think that we have to, again, make for everyone and make the billions of dollars from everyone, I think we're kind of seeing how that plays out, and it doesn't really work well, and not everyone's happy. So I don't know if that answers the specific question within there, but I think my reaction is this idea that there's alternatives to currencies, and there are alternatives to value exchanges, and I'm interested, and I have no other answers besides that, I'm interested in exploring those. How else can we go beyond $1 and think about local barters and exchanges? And that's really hard in practice, but that's where my mind goes.
No, that's as good as an opinion. Yeah.
Thank you.
So one thing I just kind of wanted to touch on the topic of is, I noticed throughout your presentation we were dealing with physical actors in terms of the audience, and kind of their behavior based upon that. My question to you is, what happens when our audience becomes artificial actors?
Explain more.
So from what I'm seeing is your behavior can be slightly modified given the actors interacting with you on an online presence. So let's say instead of a cause and effect, we kind of look at an effect and a cause, and you flip-flop that from physical actors to artificial actors, artificial intelligence. Who's to say that cannot be used, I guess, against you in a negative manner as we proceed into the future?
I love that. I think it's entirely possible, if arguably it already does happen to a certain extent. I mean, I had a slide in there which I took out. One of the environmental changes I had were bots, right? That's a thing. We are taking advice from ghosts, things that do not exist, completely artificial numbers that mean, as if the number itself didn't mean anything. Now it's being propagated by someone who does not exist and by a platform who doesn't have an incentive to turn that number lower. So I think it's entirely possible, but I think the strategies remain to a certain extent. How do we remain mindful and diligent of the physical actor or the virtual actor? I think for as long as we're mindful, I think the virtual one feels really alluring and provocative and sexy. I'll give you another example that's something that's happened related to virtual. I was approached by an organization that wanted to essentially clone me. They said, we're going to take all of your writing, years of all of your pieces, and this is the equivalent of a couple of books. I've never published a book, but it was that much writing. They said, we want to train a GPT, large language model, on all this writing so you don't have to give any more talks. You could just sell the chatbot. And I say, get the fuck out of here. Are you crazy? You crazy? But the idea that they would even have the gall or the presumption that I would be interested in that and I would cannibalize my own livelihood or cannibalize the flight that would get me here is wild. Yet there are plenty of people that are on that wait list to go do that thing. And best of luck, but I mean, we get to pick and choose. And I think, again, for as long as we're diligent and mindful and going back to those values, what's most important to us, I think we get to kind of navigate that a little bit more diligently. But we're going to figure that out as we go along. I love that. Thank you.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you for sharing.
No, of course.
Howdy. First off, appreciate you coming here, especially after South by Southwest. I'd say it's a step up, but thank you for being here.
I'd agree.
So I was actually interested in, odd way to put this, but so the way you phrased content as sentient, so that's externalizing your ideas into sort of a separate living thing, as though they're, not just a part of your mind in the way that you envision the world, but something that is waiting to be created. What value does that provide you as a creator? Does it allow you to separate yourself from ideas and say, I don't have time to do that right now, or you can wait? Or is it in some way a way of letting it grow independent of your monitoring?
In regards to deciding when not to create or when to give in, or both, either?
Yeah, both.
Okay.
So how does it affect your creative process to have externalized your creations?
I'm still trying to navigate it. That's the thing I think about all of the time. I wish I had a clear answer. There's this pull. It's this hypnotism of, Matt, it's been 2 weeks. You haven't done the thing. You haven't made the thing. People are waiting. Here's the number of the people that are waiting. Go feed them. And it feels good when you feed them and you get those affirmations and you're feeding that system. So for me, how I frame it is this almost, self-restraint of just like not giving in all of the time. Because if you give in all that time, like that dopamine or that high or that feedback starts to wear off, and now you're just making content for content and just trying to pump things out. I think more strategically, if I was to do that, I would have no ideas. Like my approach is literally just my Apple Notepad app and just like feed up the notepad until it's big enough and okay, this now warrants the thing. The last thing I hate, I'll put it this way. My least favorite thing is writing something just for the sake of writing things. Like there'd be some times I'd be commissioned, like, hey Matt, we want a topic on this, we'll pay you this amount. Those are always the worst pieces I ever write because I'm writing for just the sake of having to write the thing. So for me, how do I remain, again, I hate to overplay the word, but mindful and diligent of like, am I writing this because there's this external factor that's drawing me in, or is this coming right here? And that's always been a really effective compass and determine, my favorite pieces are the ones that I bang out in a couple of hours because I'm so excited just to get the words out there. And sometimes those are the smallest and the least read, but my favorites. And the other thing that I'll add to that is like, it also doesn't have to be all or nothing. We get to kind of create a hodgepodge of maybe, we do write something just for the sake of getting paid to keep the lights on and to afford this incredible privilege. But I love that provocation because that's the thing I'm thinking about all of the time. It's so hard. I appreciate that. Thank you.
No, I appreciate the concept. It sounds very similar in terms of in academia, publish or perish. You often have to write papers that you don't necessarily feel like are worth a full publication in a reputable conference because you need to have X number of publications out the door.
Yep.
And that kind of sucks the life out of the research process. So I found that idea very interesting. So I appreciate
that. And I think the last thing I'll add to that is that, right, it's both. Like, we get to do the thing that we get paid for. Hopefully that doesn't suck all the energy and time. Oftentimes it does, but for as long as we're carving out space for the things that, keep the flame flickering, I think that's an important balance.
Yeah.
It's hard. Easier said than done.
That's the balance that's going to be different for everybody.
Yes,
I have a friend who refuses to do computer engineering work anymore because he loves it and he hated getting paid for it. So he just builds computers for people in his spare time, but other people love what they do and they love getting paid for it.
Yes.
So
I love
Thank
it.
you.
Thank you.
Do we have another one? Oh, we have two. That's okay. We got a little bit of time, guys. Also, we'll do two more, and then I highly, highly encourage all of you to come and hang out at the music stage. We have the final set, and Matt, I don't know if you're down to have a drink or two and hang out for a minute.
100%.
What?
100%.
Oh yeah. See.
Okay.
Yeah, and we can all just hang out, and you can ask them some more questions. So, was one over here? Oh yeah, Evan. Yeah.
I can't remember the term they use, but Colin and Samir have been talking about this concept of like this hyper vulnerable YouTuber. Do you see that as sort of a natural or organic response to what we're talking about today? Or is it at least tangential?
I think it's just as bad, right? For me, at least, there is no such thing as true authenticity in an online space, in that we're performing. It is that goes back to Goffman. Like, right now, yes, I'm authentic, but at the same time, a presence informs how I'm behaving. So when you take that and try to do that on a global stage, to remain mindful of that vulnerability, and you just can't, my take at least. I mean, you look at something like Be Real, that app, right? No one's being real. For those not familiar, it's the app where you have to take the photo of yourself in real time. That is performed authenticity of like, oh, what are the odds I'm doing this thing? Like, we can't unhook from that idea of performance. Performance is chronic. So in regards to that hyper vulnerability, I mean, I do think it's a natural kind of sway, this pendulum that goes back and forth. I think post 2000, I don't know, I'm gonna make up a year, like 15 or 16, like post the Instagram aesthetic, we now have people like crying on Instagram, or like, I just got fired. Like, that's still performance. That's still posturing in such a way that you're getting attention from other people. I'm not judging, like that's what we're doing, that's fine. But to call that any more authentic than, I just had the best day ever, here are my vacation pictures, it's informed, I think, by that same behavior. Again, totally fine and cool, but I'm very skeptical of when you have that super authentic cry or bad news, and it's like, it's coming from the same place. From my vantage point, at least. It's hard to detach. And that's not to say it's physically impossible. I'm sure there are plenty of examples, but a broad stroke claim for me is it's pretty inauthentic.
Thanks.
Of course.
Do we have one more?
Once again, thanks for coming and talking about this. This has been a great presentation. My question is, how do you feel about anonymity, or kind of being able to separate yourself from the audience? I feel like there is a little bit of a two-way street there of we want to create content for others, but maybe it might be best for us to remain anonymous. And I don't know. How do you feel about that?
I'm conflicted. I'm really conflicted. I've been thinking a lot about this recently as well. There's times in which I want to nuke the whole thing and just start from scratch, and just like be someone else. Or further, if anyone I mean, you're the only ones who know, but like a guest post from someone who goes under a certain name that isn't me, but is me. Like, I'm very interested in toying with those ideas. I think what's really hard there is ego. It feels really good. It feels really good. I think it's that simple. I really think it's that simple. How do you untether from the confidence, the likes, the comments, and kill that thing? I think it's incredibly important and something I'm trying to toy with and play with. I don't know what that right methodology is, but I'm very interested in it. I have a friend who writes a very successful publication under kind of a pseudonym, or it's not their name, but if you search hard enough, you could find their name. And it gives this really sexy, provocative allure of like, is this a collective? Like, who is this figure? Like, sometimes they'll use like us instead of me or we. And that in itself has its own value. And there's a protection to it as well. And I know where he's coming from. It's that protection. And further, when you are anonymous, it's more sexy and provocative. Like there's value to that, and you don't feel as vulnerable. But that is something I am, again, these are fastball great questions. It's something that I'm thinking about, and I'm trying to explore what does a method look like where I get to toy with that in a way that I kind of get to pick and choose. And I think there are incredible freedoms in that. But how do you do so in such a way where it is so far removed, where there isn't that tie? And I think that's harder and harder and harder by the day. And I don't know if that's, I don't want to say I don't know if that's possible, but I'm skeptical of existing in an online space that is truly away from my birth-given driver's license. But I think it is important. It's really, really, really important. How do we do so in a way that still works for us and an audience? I don't know. But I think it's an exciting time for that, because I think we're moving away from that hyper publication, that personal brand, the yada yada, and I see more of that attraction towards the how do I play with my identity in a way that works for me. I don't think I have any examples, but I think that's a call to action more than anything else, and like a huge gap in how people get to play with anonymity or pseudo-anonymity online. Thank you. I love that.
Let's give Matt another round of applause, guys.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.